He had run through burning buildings, through collapsed tunnels, through the choking dark of collapsed mine shafts. In 7 years on the search and rescue unit, K9 Blaze had never, not once, stopped in the middle of a deployment. Until tonight. The forest was cold, the wind had died, and Blaze, a 100-pound German shepherd with more deployments than most officers twice his age, had gone completely, inexplicably still, not frozen by fear, not distracted, frozen by something his handler, Sergeant Marcus Webb, had never seen in him before, something that would lead them, within the next 4 hours, to a discovery that rewrote everything the department thought it knew about a case they had closed 2 years earlier. What did Blaze sense that night? And why had no human been able to find it first? Here's what the responding officers knew going in. A 14-year-old boy named Owen Garrett had gone missing from his family's campsite in Dellers Creek State Forest, roughly 40 miles outside of Millhaven, Oregon. Owen had last been seen at approximately 7:15 p.m. It was now 11:40 p.m. Temperature, 38 degrees and dropping. The search team had been working a standard expanding radius grid pattern for 2.5 hours. No sign of Owen, no scent trail, no footprints beyond the initial perimeter. That was unusual enough. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was what Blaze had done at the eastern edge of the search grid. He had simply stopped, not paused to reacquire scent, not slowed to investigate a branch or an animal trail. He had planted all 4 paws, dropped his head, and gone silent, completely silent. Marcus had never seen that in 7 years. And Marcus Webb was not a man who rattled easily. Stay with me, because what Blaze led them to that night didn't just find Owen Garrett. It uncovered something buried so deep that 2 separate investigations had walked right past it. Marcus Webb was not supposed to be a cop. Growing up in Millhaven, he had wanted to be a forest ranger. He had spent his entire childhood in the woods outside the town, fishing, hiking, learning the land the way other kids learn video game level. He knew which trails flooded in March. He knew where the elk bedded in November. He knew the forest the way he knew his own house in the dark. But at 21, a friend was killed in a crime that went unsolved for 3 years. And something shifted. Marcus joined the Millhaven Sheriff's Department at 22, made detective at 28, transferred to search and rescue at 31, not for a promotion, but because he had always believed the most important thing a law enforcement officer could do was bring people home. He was 43 now. He had gray at his temples and a methodical quietness that newer recruits sometimes mistook for aloofness. His colleagues knew better. His sergeant once said Marcus was the most patient man he had ever worked with. He doesn't rush. He doesn't guess. He just keeps going till he finds the answer. His ex-wife, who remained one of his closest friends, once put it more simply, Marcus doesn't give up on anything. He had been running search and rescue operations for 12 years by the night Owen Garrett disappeared. He had found missing hikers. He had found lost children. He had found, on 3 separate occasions, people who had not wanted to be found and had brought them home safely regardless. He had also, twice in his career, found people who were beyond finding. He carried both of those nights with him still. When the call came in about Owen Garrett at 9:18 p.m., Marcus was at his kitchen table reading. He was in his vehicle within 4 minutes. Blaze was already in the back, awake and alert, before Marcus had finished buckling his seatbelt. They had been partners for 5 years. Some partnerships are professional. Theirs was something else. Blaze came from a working dog breeding program in the Czech Republic. German Shepherd, born in a litter of 7. Identified at 9 weeks as a candidate for high-drive search work based on what trainers call an extraordinary combination of scent drive, environmental stability, and what they describe, somewhat unusually for a training report, as emotional intelligence. He spent 2 full years in training before his first working deployment: wilderness tracking, cadaver detection, avalanche search, urban disaster, live find in open terrain. By the time he was paired with Marcus, Blaze had logged more training hours than most working dogs see in an entire career. Here's what you need to understand about what a dog like Blaze can actually do. A human nose has roughly 6 million scent receptors. Blaze had approximately 225 million, but raw receptor count only tells part of the story. The section of a dog's brain dedicated to analyzing smells is, proportionally, about 40 times larger than the equivalent section in a human brain. Blaze didn't just smell more. He processed what he smelled at a level of complexity that has no human equivalent. He could track a scent trail 24 hours old across open terrain in a rainstorm. He could identify the presence of a living human body through 6 feet of snow. He could distinguish between the scent of one individual and dozens of others present in the same space. He could sense what no instrument could measure. But none of that is why Marcus trusted Blaze the way he did. He trusted Blaze because in 5 years, Blaze had never given a false alert. Not once. When Blaze said something was there, which is why, on a cold night in Dellers Creek State Forest, when Blaze stopped completely in the middle of an active search, Marcus didn't pull him forward. He crouched down beside him, put his hand on Blaze's back, and waited, because whatever Blaze had found, it was something. The search for Owen Garrett had begun simply enough. His family, father Thomas, mother Rachel, and 9-year-old sister Lily, had been camping at Dellers Creek for 3 days. Annual trip, same site they used every October. Owen was an experienced young outdoorsman. He knew the park. He had his own headlamp. He had told his parents he was going to the creek to look for frogs, a habit he'd had since he was 6 years old. When he hadn't returned by 8 p.m., his father had gone to look, found nothing. By 8:45, they had called 911. 2 patrol officers arrived within 20 minutes. The search and rescue team, Marcus, Blaze, and 4 additional team members arrived just before 10. Standard protocol. Marcus obtained a scent article from Owen's clothing, a worn hoodie from the family's tent. Blaze worked it for less than 30 seconds. Then he moved. For the first 90 minutes, the search progressed exactly as Marcus would have expected. Blaze tracked a clean trail southeast from the campsite, consistent with Owen's stated direction toward the creek. The trail reached the bank, ran east along the water for approximately a quarter mile, then fragmented. Fragmented scent trails near running water weren't unusual. The moisture disperses. The wind off the water complicates the picture. But what happened at the eastern edge of the grid, at a section of the forest none of the team had yet entered, was unusual. Blaze turned north, away from the creek, into a section of old-growth forest that the park's own trail map showed as unimproved terrain. No paths, no markers. Marcus let him work. They moved through the trees for about 6 minutes. Dense canopy overhead. No moonlight. Marcus's headlamp carving a tunnel through the dark. And then Blaze stopped. Completely. Marcus came forward to stand beside him. Looked around. Scanned with the headlamp. Nothing. Trees. Undergrowth. The sound of wind moving through branches somewhere high above. But Blaze wasn't looking at the trees. He was looking at the ground. His nose was down, hovering just above the soil. Not moving. Barely breathing. Every muscle in his body absolutely still. Marcus had never seen him like this in 5 years. Imagine standing in that darkness. Your dog, the most reliable partner you have ever had, motionless beside you, staring at a patch of ground in the middle of an old-growth forest at midnight. What would you do? Marcus keyed his radio. Webb to base. I need Team 2 at my position. Whole grid search. He gave his coordinates. Blaze has something. Not sure what yet. He got down on one knee beside Blaze. Up close, he could see the tension in the dog's frame. Not the excited energy of a live fine alert. Not the focused drive Blaze showed when he was tracking actively. This was different. Blaze was rigid, barely blinking. His breathing had slowed to something almost imperceptible. Marcus had been on enough deployments to know the difference between a dog that was tracking and a dog that had found something stationary. But this wasn't a cadaver alert behavior. He had trained Blaze for either. That had its own signature, a certain stillness, a kind of settled certainty. This was something Marcus couldn't categorize. He put his hand flat on the ground near where Blaze was focused. The soil was cold, damp, ordinary forest floor. And then he noticed something. The earth here had been disturbed. Not recently, not dramatically. But if you knew what to look for, if you had 12 years of search and rescue work behind you, you could see it. The soil surface had a slightly different texture in an irregular patch roughly 4 feet by 3 feet. The undergrowth over it was thinner than the surrounding area, as if something had once been removed from the ground here and then replaced. A long time ago, Marcus stood up slowly. His headlamp caught Blaze's eyes in the dark. The dog still hadn't moved. But now Marcus was looking at that patch of ground differently, and he was thinking about Owen Garrett, and he was thinking about something else entirely, a name he hadn't thought about in nearly 2 years, a case he had been present for, briefly, as a supporting officer, before it was handed off to detectives and eventually closed. The name was Danny Holt, 11 years old, missing from Dellers Creek State Forest. 26 months ago, the team arrived at Marcus's position 9 minutes later. He gave them a 30-second briefing, pointed out the disturbed earth, told them not to step on it. He didn't mention Danny Holt yet. He needed to focus. Owen Garrett was still missing. A living child somewhere in this forest in the cold took priority over everything else. He took Blaze off the patch of ground and recentered him on Owen's hoodie. Blaze worked for several seconds, then picked up a trail running north-northwest. 12 minutes later, they found Owen Garrett. He was sitting at the base of an old Douglas fir, approximately 800 meters from the disturbed patch of ground. He had twisted his ankle crossing a root cluster in the dark, couldn't walk, and had done exactly what he was supposed to do. Stayed put, stayed calm, and waited. He was cold and scared, but he was alive and unharmed. Owen was safe, but Marcus's night was far from over. With Owen handed off to medical team and reunited with his family, Marcus went back to the patch of ground. He called Detective Sonia Alvarez, the lead investigator on the Danny Holt case, at 1:18 a.m. She answered on the second ring. Alvarez, he told her where he was, what Blaze had found, what he suspected. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "Don't touch anything. I'm on my way." Sonia Alvarez had been the detective who worked the Danny Holt case from the beginning. Danny had gone missing during a family hiking trip 26 months earlier. 3 weeks of searching, hundreds of volunteer hours, every available resource deployed. Nothing. Eventually, the official determination had been made. Danny Holt had likely drowned in one of the creek's deeper channels. His body had not been recovered. The case had been classified as a presumed accidental death and closed. Alvarez had never been fully satisfied with that conclusion, but without evidence, there was nothing more she could do. Now, standing over phone at 1:18 in the morning, she was already reaching for her keys. Alvarez arrived at the scene at 2:07 a.m. With her, 2 forensic technicians, a crime scene photographer, and a deputy from the county sheriff's office. Marcus met them at the tree line and walked them in. Blaze walked beside Marcus quietly. He was no longer in the rigid, frozen state from earlier, but he was still oriented toward that patch of ground, still watching it. Alvarez crouched at the perimeter of the disturbed area. She had a flashlight. She moved it slowly across the surface. She didn't speak for almost a minute. Then she stood up and said to the forensic lead, "I want a careful excavation, 6-inch layers, photo documentation at every stage." She stepped back, crossed her arms, did not leave. The forensic team worked through the rest of the night. At 4:44 a.m., at a depth of 14 inches below the forest floor, they found a child's backpack, blue nylon, a faded patch of a cartoon rocket ship on the front pocket. Danny Holt's backpack. His parents had described it in their original statement. An identical description was in the case file. Inside the backpack, a water bottle, a rain jacket, a small notebook with Danny's name written inside the front cover in a child's careful handwriting. Beneath the backpack, wrapped carefully in a sealed plastic liner, additional evidence that the medical examiner's office would spend the next 72 hours analyzing. The official determination came 4 days later. Danny Holt had not drowned. He had been murdered, and his body and belongings had been deliberately concealed in this location by someone who had known this section of old-growth forest intimately. The Holt case was immediately reopened as a homicide. Alvarez pulled every thread from the original file. Interviews were reconducted. The original list of individuals who had been in Dellers Creek Forest in the days surrounding Danny's disappearance was re-examined with fresh eyes. Forensic analysis of the burial site yielded several key elements. Tire tracks, partially preserved in the compressed soil at the Forest Service Road access point, were consistent with a specific category of utility vehicle. Fiber evidence from the plastic liner was sent to the state crime lab, and a partial boot print found at the eastern edge of the excavation site was photographed and measured. Boot size, 11. Tread pattern, consistent with a commercial hiking boot discontinued in 2021. It was a small detail, but in combination with the tire tracks and fiber evidence, it pointed toward a single individual, a man named Roy Cassidy. Cassidy was a part-time park maintenance worker who had held a seasonal contract with Dellers Creek State Forest for 6 years. He knew the unimproved terrain sections better than almost anyone. He had been interviewed during the original Holt investigation briefly as one of dozens of park employees, and had provided an alibi that, at the time, had not been vigorously tested. Under re-examination, that alibi collapsed within 48 hours. Roy Cassidy was arrested at his home 17 days after Blaze froze in the forest. At trial, the prosecution's forensic case was methodical and decisive. DNA evidence recovered from the burial site, fiber evidence linking Cassidy's vehicle to the scene, the boot print, cell phone tower data, placing his device in the area of the forest on the night Danny Holt disappeared, and testimony from a former co-worker who came forward after the arrest, a man who said that 2 years earlier, Cassidy had made remarks about the Holt case that only someone present at the scene could have known. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Roy Cassidy was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Danny Holt's parents, James and Miriam, were present in the courtroom. After the verdict, Miriam Holt gave a statement to reporters outside the courthouse. She said, "We never stopped believing Danny would be found. We just didn't know it would take this long or come in this way. We are grateful. We are grateful to everyone who kept searching, including a dog that most people would never even know was there." She paused. Then she said, "Tell them his name. Tell them about Blaze." "So I am." Owen Garrett recovered fully from his twisted ankle. He was back in school the following Monday. His mother, Rachel, sent a handwritten letter to Marcus and the search and rescue team. In it, she wrote, "You brought my son home. I don't have adequate words for what that means." The letter ended with a question she said Owen had asked the morning after he was found. He had asked, "Was it the dog that found me?" When she told him yes, he had nodded very seriously and said, "I want to say thank you to the dog." 6 weeks later, Owen Garrett visited the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department. He walked up to Blaze, who was sitting beside Marcus in the department's small lobby. Owen reached out carefully. Blaze leaned his head forward and pressed it gently against Owen's hand. He knew, he always knew, Blaze received the Oregon Search and Rescue Unit's highest commendation that winter. Marcus accepted it on his behalf at a small ceremony in Millhaven. He said in his remarks, "Blaze didn't find Danny Holt because he was following a protocol. He found him because he refused to walk past something that mattered. I think we could all stand to learn something from that. There's something worth sitting with at the end of a story like this." Danny Holt was 11 years old. He went into a forest on a family hiking trip and never came home. And for 26 months, the truth of what happened to him lay buried 14 inches below the surface of that forest floor, close enough to find, but invisible to every human eye that passed nearby. It took a dog, not a machine, not new technology, not a procedural breakthrough. A dog who froze in the middle of an unrelated search. On a night, he was there for a different reason entirely, and simply refused to move on. Dogs don't weigh the inconvenience of what they sense. They don't calculate the political complexity of what they found. They don't decide that the timing is wrong or that the case is closed or that someone else will deal with it. They stop and they stay until someone pays attention. There is a particular kind of courage in that, a particular kind of loyalty, not just to the handler at the end of the leash, but to the truth itself. Whatever Blaze sensed in that cold forest, whatever signal reached him through the dark soil and the dead leaves and the long passage of time, he refused to let it go unacknowledged. Because of that, a family has answered. Because of that, a killer is in prison. Because of that, a boy named Owen Garrett got to go home to his parents that night. All because a dog froze mid-search, and a man who had learned to trust him completely let him. If this story affected you, if it made you think about loyalty, about the truth that waits beneath the surface, about the beings in our lives who notice what we miss, I'd genuinely love to know. Leave a comment below. Have you ever had a dog that seemed to sense something before you could? Something you couldn't explain? A moment where an animal's instinct outpaced your logic? Those stories matter. Share them. This channel exists to tell stories like this one. Stories of loyalty and justice and the quiet heroism that rarely makes the front page. If that's something you want more of, subscribe. It's free, and every subscriber tells us to keep going. And if this story moved you, share it. Danny Holt deserves to be remembered. Blaze deserves to be celebrated. And every person who kept searching, who never accepted the easy answer, they deserve to be acknowledged. Next week, a story I've been sitting on for a long time. A retired police dog. A cold neighborhood that dismissed a family's warning for years. And a truth that reaches back over a decade, darker and stranger than anything the investigation team expected. I'll see you then. Pay attention to what can't speak. It might be saying everything.